Welcome back to another episode of the Indy Investor Pod. I'm Brett Snodgrass, and today I get to interview Dan Perez from San Diego, and he's investing in here in Indianapolis. And I'm going to pick his brain, put him on the hot seat here. We're going to talk about strategies for investing in Indy when you are out of state, how to be efficient when you're living miles away from your market, and we're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to investing in Indianapolis out of state. Let's get to the show. And welcome back to another episode of the Indy Investor Pod. Like I said, I'm Brett Snodgrass, and I am here with Dan Perez. What's going on, Dan?
Hey, Brett. How's it going? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. I love talking to people that invest in Indianapolis and that live thousands of miles away, honestly. So welcome to the show, and just want to really pick your brain on kind of what you're doing here at Indy. And I have a lot of questions here, so it might be kind of a rapid fire thing because a lot of people that listen to our show are out of state, and it has its benefits and it has its challenges too. But before we get on the show, just kind of describe who you are a little bit. I know you and your wife and kind of your background.
Yeah. Yeah. So my wife, Kelly, and I live in San Diego. We're both W-2 corporate accountants. We both just really share a passion for real estate, and that's something we didn't get into till about a year ago. But we just really were attracted to the passive income it generates. And we initially started our journey with the goal in mind of saying, hey, we want to start a family in a couple of years. How can we put ourselves in a better position to be financially flexible? We realize things are constantly changing over time. And along with our W-2s, what else can we do to put ourselves in a solid financial position? And the path that we chose was real estate, mainly the buy and hold side for long-term passive income. And the reason we chose that is, one, we're providing quality houses for our tenants to live in. But it also comes along with paying down our properties over time and also giving us some tax benefits. So there's a lot of pros to that long-term investing side.
No, I love that. So what you kind of came across, did you guys research anything else when you were trying to figure out how to build passive income? And I always am fascinated. Did you go straight to real estate, read a book? Or did you have some clients that you knew in your accounting background that invest in real estate, and kind of how to get to that point?
Yeah, so actually my parents and my wife's parents did not invest much in real estate. So we were kind of on our own from that perspective. But one thing that we found was interesting is we like to look at trends, and we looked at a lot of the wealthier people that were years above us or years beyond us. And we wanted to analyze what they were doing. And we noticed one common denominator was they were all involved in real estate in one aspect or another, whether that was they were flippers, which is a little more on the active side, or they were all passive investors and owned rental property throughout the US. So that's where we started. And then from there, that's where we really dug into, okay, we know that real estate works. We need to be smart about this. What markets make sense for us, and what is our ultimate goal, and what criteria do we want to hold ourselves to?
Sounds good. Sounds good. So you're getting into real estate, and you decided to invest out of state, number one. So take us through that process. Where did you look first?
Yep.
You've landed on Indianapolis as one, and I don't know if you invest in other areas and other cities too. I think you said you had a property in Kansas City, but kind of take us through the process of how did you end up in Indianapolis?
Yeah. So everyone that knows me knows I really enjoy just socializing with other people, picking their brains on, hey, what's working, what's not working, what are you doing, and why. And so what I started doing was I just went all over Bigger Pockets, and anyone that threw out Indianapolis in any of their posts, whether it was good, bad, whether it didn't make sense, I reached out to them and said, how's your experience been? What have you been doing in Indianapolis? What's working? So I reached out on Bigger Pockets, reached out to people on Facebook. There's a couple of really solid groups on Facebook that I became a part of. And I went to local meetups as well to see, hey, are there any other people in San Diego that are doing what I would like to do in the future? And one of the best ways that Kelly and I really learn is we learn from other people and what they're doing well and the mistakes that they've made. And then we try to modify what they've done and then learn from our own experiences. And so after doing this for a while, there were a couple cities that really popped to the top of our list. A couple cities in Florida, Kansas City, a few in Ohio, and then Indianapolis. And what really stood out to us about Indianapolis was the job growth, population growth. We knew that there would always be a need for tenants and places for them to live. And so that really drew us to Indianapolis. There's also the low entry point to get into these homes. You can get a solid rental from 50K plus, which is unheard of on the West Coast. And one of the, I guess, more detailed aspects of it was a lot of the houses in Indianapolis aren't extremely old. You can get some quality rentals that are very affordable, that are 1950s, 1960s, that you're not going to have a ton of those deferred maintenance items that you might have on some of those older homes throughout the rest of the Midwest. So that's what really drew us to Indianapolis. But two of the biggest aspects were the cash flow that it was able to produce when we ran our numbers, and then ultimately the teams we could build there. That's one thing that I can't emphasize enough is if you have a solid team in place, you're in a much better position to succeed on your real estate adventure.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I love the kind of the hot buttons that you low entry point. You can build a great team here, great cash flow city. And when you talked about the team, and I love when you talked about you asked people that were already here and what their experience were, and I would assume a lot of them were out-of-state investors as well. And it's kind of one of those things. Whenever I go look at a house, the best way I can get information about that house is to ask the neighbor, right? The person
Right.
living right there. So, and you kind of did that. So I would just highly recommend you guys don't take our word for it, but really do your own due diligence and figure out what works for you. Indianapolis is a great city to invest for some investors, and some investors, are looking for something a little bit different. So Dan, so you started to invest in Indy, and one of the biggest things, obviously, for out-of-state investors is building the team. And I just did a podcast. We talked about mistakes, and I talked about that one of the biggest mistakes that I see is people don't really build their team first, that they do it along the way when they actually need someone. An example would be someone buys a property here in Indianapolis and doesn't know any plumbers until they need a plumber. And then it's like, it's kind of, shuffling things around, trying to get it done. So did you build your team first and talk to people that were here, and what types of team did you build?
Yeah, so that was one of our priorities up front was let's build out a team. But the difficult part about that a lot of people I think gloss over or tend to forget is when you are a newer investor, a lot of people, quite frankly, don't have the time for you. They see that you're a newer investor and they say, "Oh, you don't have any properties. We don't have time to work with you." And those are the people that we actually shied away from. We said that's totally fine. If that's the approach you want to take, great. But on the flip side, there were a ton of people in Indianapolis that said, "Hey, you are a new investor. I'd love to teach you what we're doing that works. And then I'd also love to put you in contact with other investors that were just in your position a year ago, 6 months ago." And that was amazing for us because everyone starts somewhere. And we were willing to learn, put in the time, and work with these people. And so for us, starting out, yes, building the team was number one. But it's tough to know what questions to ask when you haven't quite done it yet. And so even since the first part of the teams that we've built out early on, we've slowly adapted. We've worked with more people over time. We've met other vendors that really fit our criteria and our style. But it is important to lay that foundation before you do jump in. I know I see a lot of posts on Bigger Pockets and other real estate blogs that say, jump in and it's okay to make mistakes on your first investment. That's part of the process. That's great and all, but we wanted to succeed on our first one. We can still learn from having successes. We don't need to necessarily fail on the first one to learn. And so that's why we wanted to put a team in place. And that team consisted of mainly a property manager, wholesalers and agents to help us find these quality deals. We had our contractors and our inspectors, and then a lender. So those were the main points that we really focused on when we were looking to build out a team in Indianapolis.
That's cool. That's great advice. So property manager, wholesalers, and agents to help find deals. a lender, an inspector in there. And then, of course, if you're fixing up the properties and doing maintenance and rehab, the contractors are pretty key, right?
Yeah.
That's awesome. So, is there anything that you would advise an investor right now when they're building their team? Can you hear that in the background? Sorry. Can you hear that noise in the background?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, hold on a second. So Dan, so we talked about building the team and how important that is. Is there anything that you would advise the new investor coming into Indianapolis to watch out for? Was there any mistakes that you made looking back and you're like, man, I really should have vetted that person more, or done something a little bit different when you were building that particular team?
Yeah. So I think the best place to start ultimately is just speaking to other investors that are doing what you're looking to do. They've already gone through this learning process. They've done their own form of vetting in some capacity. So I think relying on them a bit up front to really narrow down your list is important. And then from there, you can ask the questions that mean the most to you. Kelly and I really love the quick communication, quick feedback, just being very transparent. That's something that we look for in team members. And so what I would recommend to newer investors is really focus on your property manager first. I think a property manager can help you in multiple aspects of investing. They can help you analyze the deals, give you a better sense of neighborhoods, help you run rent rates, tell you what type of tenants you're going to put in your properties. These are all really important questions that you're going to want to know because a lot of times investors will look at numbers on a spreadsheet and it'll look like a great investment, but depending on your risk tolerance, it might be the exact opposite of the type of property you want to take on. And that's where a property manager can step in and help give you a better sense of what you're actually looking at over the coming years with this property. So I would start with the PM, and then from there, working with wholesalers, agents. That's kind of the next step as far as starting that deal funnel. You can look at Redfin, Zillow, analyze deals daily. But where we've seen a lot of our benefit is finding those off-market deals and just working with as many vendors as possible so that our funnel is large and we can pick and choose what deals we want to ultimately take down.
Yeah, no, I love that. And you basically start with the property manager because they're kind of in that neutral position. I mean, they want your business, but they don't want to manage certain areas or a bad tenant situation, right? So
Yep.
I think
Correct.
they definitely have some invested interest in what type of tenant they're managing and what type of maintenance things. So they're going to be very, very honest with you with that. So we built the team. You guys kind of start off there, and we talked about the aspects of building the team. And now let's just talk about the strategies that you're using currently here in Indianapolis. So it sounds like you do mostly cash flow properties, right? And so talk to us about that and what type of strategy are you doing?
Yeah, so we use the BRRRR method. And what I mean by that is when we purchase our properties, we look to buy far under market value, add some nice finishes to it. Some rehabs are larger than others, but we go into these properties saying we want to add value, force appreciation, so that on the back end, we can refinance out most, if not all, of our money and our investors' money and kind of rinse and repeat and keep doing the same process. So what we look to do is when we purchase a property, we want our purchase price, our rehab budget, and our closing costs all in to be under 75% of our ARV after repair value. That doesn't happen all the time, I wouldn't say, but if we can aim for that, it's okay to leave a little money in the deals for us, depending on what the deal looks like. And so it sounds easy in theory, but the purchase is just the first part. But actually vetting the numbers and making sure, hey, does our rehab come in on budget after looking at the inspection report, after having the contractor walk the property, and then ultimately on the back end, we need to make sure the value of the home is where we need it to be in order to refinance out our numbers. And to do so, we normally have our agent or another trusted member on our team run a comparative market analysis. And what that does is it says, hey, Dan, if you do X, Y, Z to this property, based on comps in the area, here's what the property should be worth. And we normally try to be conservative on this. And once we get all of our numbers, then we look at the deal and we say, does this make sense? Are we able to refinance out our money or our investors' money? And two, is the rent rate that we're going to be able to get for this house, does it make sense for our cash flow numbers? And what we do to verify that number is we reach out to our property manager and we say, hey, here's the house that we're looking at. Here are the finishes we're going to do to the house. It's going to have a fenced in yard. It's going to have granite countertops, whatever it might be. What type of rent rates are you seeing in this neighborhood? And that's how we kind of verify all of our numbers across the board. And if we're one, able to refinance out our money, and two, able to rent it for a strong enough rent rate to our cash flow makes sense, then that's a deal that we're willing to move forward with.
Awesome. I love it. And a lot of the out-of-state investors really like the BRRRR strategy. And again, I like what you said about buying as the first step, right? Because where you can really get hurt and lose money, at least in my experience, is the rehab. If you go over budget, it takes a lot longer than what you thought, and you spend a lot more money than what you thought. And that can really hurt the deal with that. And then the last thing is, if you get a bad ARV and if you overestimate what it's going to be worth, that can really hurt that investment as well. So have you kind of found with the BRRRR strategy that is there a limit to that? I know that some banks, limit. It sounds like, I know we were talking before the show, but how many properties are you up to here in Indianapolis right now?
We have 25 rental properties right now.
25 rental properties. And that just kind of was mind blowing for me, just because when I was talking to you, Dan, before the show, I was expecting, because you just started this literally February 19?
Yeah. Yep. Correct.
February 2019. So about a year, a little over a year, and you're already up to 25 properties. And when you did the BRRRR strategy, did you refinance a package of homes? Was this one by one, or because I don't know, that just sounds like a lot going on behind all that.
It was a lot of work, but we enjoy it. So I think anytime you have a passion for something, you tend to put some hard work into it, and you're willing to do whatever it takes to have it succeed. But for us, what we did is we actually did a portfolio commercial refi on our first, I believe it was 12 doors. And we used a local credit union in Indianapolis. And we refied 12 of them at once. There's pros and cons to it. I would say the biggest pro is they actually take into account the income-based approach on the appraisal. Most appraisers take the sale comp approach, which doesn't always tend to directly correlate to the amount that you were hoping to get on the refi. So what this credit union does is it takes the income-based approach, and a lot of the rents that we were getting were pretty strong based on the homes that we were putting out for tenants. And so we were able to successfully BRRRR out 100% of our money and our investor money across those 12 doors on the first go. So once we had success with that, we were in the process of doing another 11 doors this past month, but with everything that's going on, that's been placed on hold for now. The credit union has all of our information, and we'll pick back up once everything settles down.
Now, I like that. It's never underestimate the power of a good local community bank, especially everything that's going on right now. I've been a Chase customer for the last 15 years, and I like Chase. It's very convenient. You can wire money straight from your app on your phone. Like it's just a convenient way to do business. But with everything going on, I personally underestimated the power of that local bank relationship.
Yep.
And I just think it's so important to do that now, as I've talked to 3 local banks here in the last few days about the programs that are going on, and really just not even about that, just about how can I build that relationship for when we can, when we need something like what you're talking about. So that's awesome, man. I want to really dive into, so we've talked about building the team. We've talked about, the strategy that you're using as far as cash flow, the BRRRR strategy. And I love being able to do that commercial loan. I think just a package like that is awesome, because when I'm thinking of burst strategy, I'm like, man, 25 properties, 25 loans. I'm like, ooh, that's like crazy, right? So, so that's awesome to be able to do that. And I know that you work with a lot of out-of-state investors. You guys have a group out in San Diego, and I'm sure that you talk a lot about different strategies. There's also the out-of-state investor Facebook group that I know that you're a big part of as well. Um, so we've talked about a lot of the good things. You are very successful, and I'm sure you have some friends that are very successful, but there's probably some bad and some challenging things that you've seen either from yourself or from other investors. So what do you think is like one or two of the challenging things that you can really share that um, can really just help? People always learn from mistakes, kind of like what you said.
Right.
So either from yourself or other people, like what's a couple of those big ones?
I would say pairing yourself up with the wrong professionals. I think that's probably where most investors can and will go wrong. There are a lot of great vendors that might work well for some people, but they might not necessarily sync up with you, whether it's your business style, whether it's the type of property you're picking up versus the type of property that they manage, or whatever it might be. There's so many different aspects to who you want to work with and who you pair well with. And I think that's where everyone needs to start. So if you can really take time to hone in on your team, it's going to make everything easier and you won't have to backtrack later on. I also think that, like we just touched on the appraisals, that's probably one of the biggest challenges that I'm seeing across the board. I've faced it. Other investors that I'm close with have faced it. It's the one piece of the puzzle that you have almost no control over when the time comes. You can do your best to put yourself in a solid situation to succeed on that appraisal, but you can only do so much. Like we've noticed with some of our appraisals, it's nice to have that fenced in yard, central AC, nicer countertops, whatever it might be, but every appraiser is different. So you can't always be inside the head of the appraiser. All you can do is put yourself in the best spot and hope for the best. And I would say the third thing is just going off of numbers that you run on paper. Don't always just go off those numbers. When we first started, I think we made that mistake. Luckily, we didn't pull the trigger on those properties, but there were a ton of properties in less desirable areas of Indianapolis as far as our criteria. And we're meeting the 2% rule, almost the 3% rule. But then our property manager that we're working with had to scale us back and say, you have to understand the headaches and the obstacles that are going to come with these properties that look like home runs on paper. Yeah, you're going to get some of those in better areas and go for it. But just be careful with just going off the numbers on paper and understand the risk that comes with it. Because I think that's a huge thing that people tend to overlook.
Yeah, I love that. I think that you've mentioned risk tolerance like 4 times in this show, in those areas, and I always say that you can really win at any area in Indianapolis, but you have to really know what you're doing and the risk tolerance. Obviously, some of the C and D class areas really look like great investments, and you can hit some of those high cap rates and high percentages. But the risk is that you're going to be on the phone more with your property management company. There's risk of things being stolen. There's risk of maintenance issues, high turnover, things like that, which will eat up into your cap rate. That doesn't show up on the spreadsheet, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I know when we first started, and I think everyone's naturally drawn to this, but we were just always trying to get the highest rent rate. What is the highest rent that we can get for this property? But the property managers we work with, they all say the same thing. We have to really tailor in the expenses. That's where you can really increase that margin on your properties. You can only force rent rates so much in neighborhoods. They just naturally have to raise based on the other properties around them. But with the expense side, you can really reduce a lot of these expenses by buying right, by doing the right maintenance. And again, where you're going to get eaten up alive is the turn costs and the vacancy. And in these rougher neighborhoods, you might be able to hit a 2% rule, but what's your vacancy look like? What does the theft and vandalism look like? Are you going to have higher turn costs? Are you going to have to go out there and send someone to collect rent every month because it's late? There's a lot of added time and obstacles that go into it that you might not necessarily be willing to do. I know we're not, but that doesn't mean other investors aren't willing to do it.
Amen. Amen. Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today, Dan. A lot of great nuggets for out-of-state investors and even local investors too. I mean, all of this stuff really applies. I mean, you still have to build the team. You still have to know the areas and the challenges that kind of come with it. But if someone wants to reach out to you, where's the best place for them to find you? Is it Facebook or?
Yeah, I would say Facebook. I'm in the Indianapolis out of state Facebook group that Ernesto put out there for everyone. Great group. Please reach out to me there. More than happy to help where I can.
Yeah, and again, there's a great group in the Facebook that Dan was talking about is the Out of State Investor Indianapolis group, and Ernesto, we're actually going to have him on the show here later, and he put this group together, and it is just solid, and I think it's just because it's really intentional, right? It takes a lot of the fluff out of it, and it's really just about bringing value. There's not a lot of deals thrown around. It's really just about how can we bring value to out-of-state Indianapolis investors. So definitely check that out, guys. And you can find Dan Perez on there as well. So that wraps up today. And if you guys are interested in asking me questions, you can find me on Facebook at Brett Snodgrass. Just look up us, and we're pretty involved on that Facebook group as well. So we'll check you guys next time. Thanks again, Dan. Wish you the best, man.
All right. Thanks, Brett. Nice talking to you.